Good morning. Today we are in Concord, Massachusetts at the Minuteman State Park. We're doing a painting of this view that you see here, only it won't quite end up like that. We're going to add a bit of color to the foliage, a kayaker, canoeist, and reshape the forest a little bit too to make it a little more dramatic. The challenge was to take a sort of a boring arrangement of shape and color and think about improvising to make something a little more dynamic. Starting with the yellow ochre wash to get a feeling of the kind of big shapes of the foliage and the river that turns around, comes around the corner. And this yellow ochre is going to be a nice foundation for the colors that I use, but it gives me an instant impression about the big shape and where I might leave some lighter shapes. I'm going to draw a little figure of a canoeist into this wash before I get started, and we'll use that to give us a feeling of scale and also a place to have a center of interest as well as some bright color. And the next sequence we're going to start with some, basically every warm color we have on our palette. Some yellow ochre, some cad yellow, some cadmium red light, some burnt sienna, and this is all being mixed on the paper, trying to catch that big shape that I created in the beginning of foliage. In our photograph, if you remember, it was a green, a very simple green, and not much to really enjoy about that scene. So we want to be in autumn now. We're really anxious. It's October, and we're used to seeing some foliage, but it hasn't happened for us yet. Anyway, it's a chance to kind of exercise our memory of autumn foliage. So into this mixture of warm colors, I've been placing a little bit of neutral tint mixed with ultramarine blue. Been doing this while the paint is wet. Thus, we get a rich dark, but dark that has soft edges. And it'll provide a lovely contrast in the scene while still receding against the trees which are closer. Taking my time in this one section to adjust it until I feel, okay, it's good enough, we can move on. At this point, I'm going to start placing the mass of foliage which is closer. This is the bank that was near to us, and using more green in this section, cooler colors. Medium strength green followed by some shadows done in the same ultramarine blue and neutral tint, a very strong, deep, rich color that's going to create strong shadows in our scene. If we reference the photograph, we'd see that these shadows were falling at an angle. In other words, the light is coming from above, and there was a slight pitch to it. So as I make those strokes, you're going to notice that I'm placing these strokes at an angle. I apologize for the glare on the paper. That makes it a little confusing as to what's going on. And let's face it, this is sort of a chaotic state in the painting where it's really hard to gauge and hard to explain what's going on, both technically and in my mind. I am using two tones in this foliage. I started with that deep green, sunstruck green, and I've been adding now this neutral tint underneath the eaves, trying to emulate the feeling of sun kind of falling over the top of the tree. This dark color that we are using, of neutral tint and a little bit of ultramarine blue, cool dark, I'm carrying it right into the water. This is the reflected shape of that near tree. and I've made it as positive a shape as I can. I've left a few little spaces for rocks or a few little spaces for holes in the sky, but overall it's a pretty imposing shape that comes directly from this tree which is near to us. I'm doing the same thing from the far shore, taking these colors, these warm colors, and painting the water, the reflection of these colors into the water. One strategy I'm thinking of is to, where I have the darker foliage on the far shore, the shadows, I want to use that to run through my figure. In other words, I want to surround this figure with a pretty rich dark, both in the distant foliage and in the reflection below. So that's what I'm applying now. I'm refining that shape. I'm perhaps being too careful around the oars. They might get a little distorted as a result. But otherwise I'm going quite dark around the figure into the reflection, and I'm painting some of that dark back into the back foliage. So it's become quite a dramatic scene. This color is just like swirling and flying here and there. Water is blending it for me, and so is gravity, and I'm kind of got my fingers crossed that this is going to end up drying as I envision it. It may not. I've been careful to kind of use thicker color in some of these areas with the foreknowledge that it's going to dry pretty dark and give me a flatter feeling to the water and to that distant foliage. Finishing off this, actually maybe you can kind of see it, the combined shapes of foliage. They form this big dark with a few little passages where we're going to place a light blue to kind of create a feeling of sky just above the foliage, and definitely a little more sky in the water. I'm adding that now to get a sense of it. I'll probably darken it as I finish the painting after everything is dried. But I do want to see it in its dried state before I make those changes. So this is still pretty wet. I think you can see some of the shine is left, and things are starting to settle, and it's starting to give us the image that we started with. And now it's a matter of adjusting the whites as I see fit. I'm going to put some blue into this lower white. I'm going to put some darks back into the foliage, and I'm going to add some slight tones to the whites that I left for some of the edging along the far river or that's floating in the water. The white needs to be purposeful, and so in the next few minutes this is going to dry. I'm going to place a little graded wash over the painting, and here you can see it. It's pretty much done. Autumn foliage in Massachusetts.